Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chubak, physician and surgeon from New Jersey. I'm Dr. Paul Reeves, your host and moderator, also host of Dr. Paul's Family Talk radio show. Also as part of the panel, Dr. Diane Chubak, CEO of Chubak Medical Group, and Dr. Deborah Waitley, psychologist and author from California. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we take you through the entire book, The Blueprint to Your Success Story, Essential Power Words and Workbook, all written by Dr. John A. Chubak, MD. Story. This is episode 4, a book written by physician and surgeon from New Jersey, Dr. John A. Chubak. And let's get into it right away. But first of all, let's welcome our panel, Dr. John A. Chubak. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. Doing great. Looking forward to today's program.
Glad to have you along. And also the CEO of Chubak Medical Group, Dr. Diane Chubak. Good morning, Diane. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thank you so much.
All right.
Great to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to kick off episode 4. We're looking good and ready to go. And Dr. Chubak, how about if I hand it to you right away? I believe we're starting with the word creativity.
Sure. Let's get right into it. Creativity is a noun. The definition is the quality of having or showing an ability to make new things or think new ideas. Creativity is fundamental to possessing a winning approach to life. Creativity takes myriad forms. You need not be a painter or sculptor to be creative. Being creative may find its outlet in finding unique solutions to problems that inherently arise in business and in the personal sphere. Creativity lends itself to be solution-oriented rather than problem-focused. Creativity is often believed to be innate or reserved for a special few in any society or culture. Although there may be some individuals to whom a creative tendency comes a bit more easily, I strongly believe that it is ultimately a skill like any other that can be learned through proper training and practice. Sadly, too many people are either not encouraged or worse, discouraged from developing any creative thinking and expression. In my own life, I've had the good fortune to paint, draw, write poetry, record educational audio programs, and author several nonfiction books. I asked no one's permission to pursue any of these activities. I waited for nobody's encouragement or validation of whether I was capable or qualified to launch into any of these undertakings. I've also dabbled in music by taking some classical guitar lessons with only modest success, but it didn't stop me from trying. I strongly believe the more of these creative outlets you find for yourself, the more likely you are to find something that really clicks. Furthermore, I feel that all creative processes are somehow linked in our central nervous system, and each activity paves the way for the next. In other words, I hold that by drawing, singing, playing the flute, etc., the individual's mind becomes more limber, more dynamic, and more facile when it comes to finding creative answers to issues that may arise in the workplace, for example. Research shows that children who learn a musical instrument improve their aptitude for mathematics. Besides any practical application that creativity may have, it can also be a wellspring of pleasure and add great richness to your life experience. I strongly advise you to look for areas in the creative realm that appeal to you and explore them. Buy a book on knitting, take a course at the local community or night school on oil painting or pottery. Find an avocation that brings you happiness, and don't be afraid to try as many as you like. These opportunities are plentiful and make the fabric of your life much more interesting and rewarding in ways you may not at first appreciate. We have a quote now from Henri Matisse, the renowned French artist who lived from 1869 to 1954, who said, "Creativity takes courage." And I like that quote very much.
All right, Diane, why don't I hand it to you in terms of creativity? And there are some similarities to the career I used to be in, the career you're in. You know, we're managing a situation, we're managing an office, every aspect of it. And sometimes we feel like we're not being creative. But my guess is you're highly creative, because how else could you pull this off, right?
It's very true. The word creative, like John describes in his in the book. I mean, it could have very much to do with just individual activity, just exploring what you can create from your mind's, eye, and what you could put on paper on a canvas. From my perspective, even as a young child, I never considered myself creative. It just wasn't a word I used to describe myself, although I kind of coveted that. I really wished that I were creative, and I just didn't take a lot of art classes, etc. And I was always very much a science person, and you know, just learning a lot of facts and things like that, and it's just the way my mind worked. But it wasn't until I got older, until I started running a business, until I started my MBA program, business school, that I became more collaborative with people. Because even in my previous career as a scientist, I mean, we very much worked. We were very much in our own heads, and people were very proprietary about a lot of what they were doing until things were published, and then maybe some collaboration would happen. So, it wasn't something again until I started running a business and managing employees that I realized that extraordinary creativity comes out of collaboration. And that's where I felt, oh, wow, the things that I can come up with now when I'm with my team, and whether we're having a formal meeting or just a quick huddle, just walking, or you're talking about certain things. I mean, it's really incredible. And it goes back to that same idea of like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So that when people are collaborating, new ideas and people with different ways of thinking, different perspectives come together and create something totally new. And I think that I mean, anybody who's studying personal development will know of Napoleon Hill, right? I mean, famous name. I mean, it's so much of that content that are in those books, The Law of Success and Think and Grow Rich, has been rehashed and reused in so many subsequent forms of media, books, etc. But in these books he comes up with this idea of third minding. And to quote, he says, no two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force, which may be likened to a third invisible mind. So, so much of where our growth in business, so much of our marketing ideas came from this type of third minding. So, and I come to sort of from the business perspective again, as you mentioned, Paul. I study business. I read a lot of business journals. There was a great article in Fast Company that where they did a study. I think it was through they looked at IBM at the time, and they were saying, out of all the CEOs, what is the most important quality, and especially in the tech sector, creativity was the number one thing. I mean, in other words, it was like 60% of people said that that was more important, even over integrity, which ranked about 52% or some 50%. So it was really very interesting. And when you think about what's going on in business and how technology has really grown so much. In fact, I think the technology sector represents about 10% of our GDP now. I- Creativity, innovation has become the name of the game. And when you hear stories about how Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and these guys, they foster a sense of creativity and innovation. They there's ping pong tables and places where they can kind of get out of their head a little bit, out of the office, and be more in outdoors, or like I said, playing ping pong or doing something. They do walking meetings where they can just allow themselves to relax a little bit and collaborate. And it's really a great thing. So I think that you know again, creativity is so important as a group, as an organization.
I cannot imagine not being creative. And unlike your upbringing, Diane, I was in music right away. So I was in the creative area, didn't know it, never thought of
Hmm.
myself as a creative person, but I guess I was. And it even translated into other areas like sports, like baseball, for example. I'd be playing shortstop, and a certain batter would come up, and I'd shift 2 or 3 feet to my left, and the manager would ask me, well, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Well, because the last 10 times I've seen him hit, he's hit like 2 or 3 feet to my left." And he goes, "Well, how'd you think of that?" I didn't have an answer. I think it's just the creative mind just kind of told me to get over there because that's
Yeah.
probably where the ball is going to go, 80, 90% of the time.
Hmm.
And then through my career as a teacher, of course, as a band director, it's all creativity, but you're also managing something. 350 kids and over 800 parents, including step parents. And so there's a lot of managing going on, but a lot of creativity as well. Obviously, being in music. Being a school principal, of course, the traditional principal in the areas that I was employed was it's all black and white. You go right by the book, 1 through 10, and then you go home and try it again tomorrow. And I thought, well, okay, you brought me in because you're not doing well. Maybe that's one of the reasons why. And one of the first things we did was I took a look at the organization of classes. So I said, how are students assigned to classes? They said, oh, just throw them in the computer, and whatever the computer spits out, that's it. If it says math first hour, they go to math first hour, and so on and so forth. I said, so there's no rhyme or reason. You just throw it in the computer. Yeah. And yes, that was a logical answer to them. So I said, what if we tested each kid and found out their best learning style? And what if we find 30 kids who are visual learners and put them in a classroom with the teacher whose best teaching practice is the visual teaching process? How much better would that work? Of course, everybody looked at me like, well, that's the dumbest idea we've ever heard. But of course, I was the principal. I had the authority to make that change as long as it worked. Now, if it didn't work, I wouldn't be there much longer. But, we did it, and we did it with all of the kids, all of the learners, all of the subjects, and the scores went up dramatically, 100%, 200%, even as high as 400%. And people thought, wow, that's really smart. I thought, no, it's not really smart. It's just being creative and
Hmm.
sometimes using logic as well. Had we done steps 1 through 10, it's either black or it's white, we'd be back where you guys have been the last 25 years. And it didn't really hit me until about 10 years ago or so. I sat down to write my first book for parents. I had written books on education and curriculum for the education field, those who are practicing that profession. But as I sat down to write, I had decided on my own, okay, I'm going to work like crazy all week. Saturday morning, I'm going to get up at 4 or 5 a.m., work out, get ready for the day, and then hit the computer and start writing, probably for 2 or 3 hours just to see what happens. And after about 2 or 3 hours, I stopped. I thought, well, yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was really into it. My mind was buzzing, my body was buzzing, and I only had coffee, nothing, no sugar or anything else. And I realized when I looked at the clock, it wasn't 2 or 3 hours. It was probably closer to 6, if not 7 hours straight that I had been writing and didn't even realize it. And that's when it hit me. I have to be creative. Not only do I enjoy it and want to do it, but I must be creative to excel in other areas of life. And when I shared that with people who had known me forever, including my own mother, who obviously has known me since birth, I said, I believe I'm a highly creative person who needs to create. Not doesn't mean want to. Of course, I want to, but if I don't create, it's not a good day. And she looked at me. She said, "And you just realized this?" And I said, "Yeah, consciously, I just realized it." She said, "Well, you should have asked me. I could have told you that when you were 6 months old." And so sometimes we miss the obvious about ourselves. But I'm guessing, Diane, before we go back to John, you feel the same thing when you've created something in the office or at the Chuback Medical Practice. You just feel a whole lot better instead of going by the book that somebody else wrote, steps 1 through 10, which might have worked for them, might not work for you. But doesn't that make you feel better when you've created something that nobody's seen before? And wow, look at
Yes.
everything else that's gone up, right?
It's certainly a great feeling, but an even better feeling. And I think that something that works and is really great for an organization just to allow, your team to really create, give them that opportunity to, let everybody be heard, let everybody's ideas come forth, because it does, it feeds back on everybody's happiness because they need to create too. And I think that they get so much more fulfillment from their jobs, and they think outside the box, and when they know that they're given that leeway to do so, and they won't be judged for it or anything, I just think that you get your company culture, everything in addition to whatever product you're putting out there, really benefits from that.
Right. And Dr. John Chuback, back to you. But I'm sure you're familiar with this. When the Apple company first started, and maybe they're still doing it, I don't know, but they looked for these tech geniuses who were also creative. They had their own band, they played guitar, they were an artist, they sang, they did something in the creative field because Jobs believed those are the people I want creating technology, not just the geeks who sit there 25 hours a day banging out stuff on the keyboard, but those who also are creative. And I'm guessing that's how you've lived your life, and certainly your professional life, right?
Well, I think again, creativity is something that was fostered in me um, from an early age, not necessarily at home, but through the school system. I think, in the public education system that I was a part of, we had a uh, phenomenal curriculum, um, which required that everybody participate in art and music. And I didn't have any real proclivity for music, although I did have to participate. I enjoyed singing more than anything else, but everybody was given a recorder to play. And so you had to start with, some simple tunes on the recorder. Um, but certainly the art classes are something that I gravitated to very much and enjoyed drawing and painting and working with clay and sculpture, etc. So that was something that I embraced at an early age, and continued to study through high school and even into college. I took studio art classes and um, live drawing of the human figure, the human form in the studio, and um, various various expressions of fine art and visual art. Um, so I think that was largely helpful in my development as a human person, and and encouraged me to try other things where other people might be more apprehensive at first. One of the things that I have learned in studying this personal development material over the last 20 years very, very intensely, a belief system, and Paul, you're aware of this from our other conversations and shows, but a belief system that I've come to believe in very, very strongly is the idea that we are spiritual beings. Uh, and again, I don't ask anybody to share my beliefs. I'm not looking for any, we're not looking for followers. We have no movement to join, but it's just an expression of my belief that we don't have a soul, we are a soul. We are spiritual beings living in a physical body and in possession of an intellect. And that we are, and in possession of a mind. And we've talked about that before. We are not our mind, we possess a mind. The mind is a tool. So the mind is the instrument of the spiritual being, and the body is the instrument of the mind. So that the spiritual being gets expressed through its mind and body, whether that means running a business, creating new divisions, creating new marketing campaigns, creating a new book, creating a new policy. These are all creative activities. Even as Diane refers to being a basic scientist working in the laboratory, you have to create a protocol, you have to create a thesis, you have to create a project, you have to design a study. Uh, um, these are an experiment. These are all creative processes, um, but people aren't necessarily being educated to believe that that's a creative process. Where, of course, in fact, of course, it is. So, bringing it full circle in terms of this spiritual nature of things, I believe that we are, as it is often said, created in God's image, and that we are here to do God's work. And then the question becomes, well, what is God's work? And the question to that question is, well, who is God? And the answer would be the Creator. So if He is the Creator, then creation is His work. And if we're here to do that work, then we're here as co-creators with God. We're here to create programs like this. We're here to create a book like the one that I wrote. We're here to create jobs for other people as we do through our business. We're here to create an environment where we bring better health to people suffering from venous and lymphatic disorders in our practice. We are, by nature, creative. Um, to the most simple things. When you go to the refrigerator to make yourself a sandwich, you're creating a sandwich.
Yeah.
You make the choice mustard or mayonnaise, or both, lettuce and tomato or not, ham and Swiss or ham and cheese, or ham and provolone, let's say, rather than Swiss. So these are all creative decisions that come so naturally to us that we dismiss them as something other than being creative. But you are being creative. When you get dressed in the morning, you look at your wardrobe, you look in your closet, you look at the articles of clothing, how you put them together is creative. So creativity is essential to the essence of our spiritual being, and I feel that it's why we're here. And when you look at the earth and the world, over the last, let's say, even 150 years of recorded history, of let's say 6,000 or 7,000 years of recorded history, the extraordinary abundance of creativity is what has made life so much better for the human species, with automobiles and air travel and air conditioning and water purification and irrigation and farming and harvesting of crops and distribution channels, and on and on and on and on the list goes, all manifestations of the creative nature of the human being and the human person.
Well, that's significantly more powerful than if, as you mentioned, if God is the creator, if we are creative, then we're one with him. That's what we were meant to do. That's basically what you're saying, right?
Well, we are, again, this is a belief system, and
Right.
not everyone shares it, certainly, and I'm not asking anybody to share it.
Right.
I'm not here to, I'm not a preacher,
Right.
I'm not a minister, and I don't have any such authority. I'm an amateur on this stuff, I can assure you. These are only personal beliefs and personally held feelings that I'm expressing and sharing. Um, but we are not only created by God, but we're created by God from God. So uh, we are a part of that spiritual essence. Um, from my scientific background, I see so many beautiful um, similarities and comparisons between the scientific world and the um, spiritual world. I won't even use the word religious, but the spirituality and science are really the only two things that we have to go to for answers. There are really no other sources or potential explanations. And it's very easy to look at those two elements and see them as um, obviously, grossly distinct from one another. But on the other hand, if you look at it, I believe, with a more open heart and mind, you'll make a lot of connections. So the one the one philosophy says that before the universe existed, there was only one thing, and that one thing was God. And God was there forever. And then God created the universe and the galaxies and the planets and the stars, and ultimately, on this planet called Earth, the people. The, the other explanation is that before the universe and before time, there was only one thing, and this thing was this tiny particle that existed in nothingness. And that particle was simply there and had always been there and had existed forever for no good reason and with no explanation. And that's something that, as a scientific student, one has to have, here's the big word, faith in. You have to have faith that that particle simply existed for the sake of existing, and it always existed, and it was always there. You immediately start to see a parallel between these two stories. They both require faith, and they both have a starting point, the starting point being prior to the universe and prior to time, prior to space and time. There was something that was the originating source. Now you can put a label on it, God, or you can put a label on it, particle, and some people use the term God particle and so on and so forth, trying to bring these stories together. But what is for Now, well, that's not even for sure. Nothing is for sure. As a scientist, I don't say anything is for sure. As a medical doctor and a trained scientist with a degree in biology and medicine, I don't take anything for granted. But the two very well accepted possibilities are one or the other. There was God or there was this particle, and God created the universe, or the particle spontaneously exploded, what we call the Big Bang theory. And from that particle, everything else in the universe arose. From that infinitely dense, infinitely hot, infinitely tiny particle, smaller than a subatomic particle, smaller than a quark, all of the energy and all of the potential mass in the known universe was inside of that particle. If that story is true, which I have no reason to doubt, but if it is true, then you and me and Diane and the equipment that we're recording on, and the planet and all the stars and all the universes, all the galaxies at least, um, arose from that particle. So we are from the particle. We are the particle, just more spread out, cooled off, and less dense. But we are all from that particle. We are all that particle. If the answer turns out to be God was the particle, then we are from God and we are a part of God, which is to your point. So we're, in a sense, not that we are God, but we are God-like, and we are from that source. We are of that essence. So if He created the universe, He created us. We're here to assist Him in creating everything else that comes forever and ever after that. So it's kind of a heavy conversation in a way, and sort of profound in a sense. But on the other hand, I think it's a real simplification of some very, very heavy material that each of us has to kind of cope with and grapple with as we mature as individuals from childhood.
Okay, before we move on to the next word, I have a question for each of you. Diane first. Now, we've already talked about creativity and why, at least you and I, and John obviously too, why we believe creativity is so important. It's not just something to do for fun on a Saturday night. It's one of those things, if you do it every day or maybe make it a part of you, your life is so much more valuable and you get so much more done, even if you're going steps 1 through 10 out of a book somebody else wrote. What can we do with people who don't, it might be an awkward question, but who don't understand that or had their creativity shut off years ago by somebody who said, quit playing the stupid piano. It's too loud. I'm trying to get some sleep. And so they stopped playing the piano and they stopped learning how to draw and everything else. Any tips on how to reawaken that in people? Or just show them the way, or what do you suggest?
Well, I mean, I think what John was saying is absolutely true. I mean, if you remind people, which he very much reminded me, even as a scientist, of course I was creative. I guess I just didn't feel the energy of it until later on when I was doing other things. But just reminding people that in their everyday choices, they are being creative, and just showing them that these things are, you know, uh, ongoing, and that's just it's just a natural characteristic of us as humans, that we're always in the creative state. John,
It's
what do you think?
well, I think that from the point of view of creativity and encouraging creativity, it brings us back to Henri Matisse's great quote: "Creativity takes courage," and that is interesting because um, the previous word that we studied in the last episode that we finished with was courage, and how important that is. Um, and to remind us, the quote there from Baltasar Gracian was, "Without courage, wisdom bears no fruit." So this tells you courage and creativity go hand in hand. Well, why does it take courage? Well, it takes courage to sit down at a piano, which is a big, intimidating instrument with 88 keys, when you can't read music, you don't know what the pedals do. Your left hand, in most people, is relatively useless because we're right hand dominant people that have done almost everything with our right hand: brush your teeth, cut a steak, write your name, um, shave your face, comb your hair, button your shirt. And then somebody says, now with your left hand, I'd like you to do something equally complex as what you're doing with your right hand. And your left hand is like, you know, a, a practically paralyzed.
Right.
So that's intimidating. So the easiest thing to say is, I hate the piano. I don't want to play. It's stupid. I quit. You haven't begun. Well, then I won't begin.
Right.
So it takes courage to become a surgeon. It takes courage to become a principal. It takes courage to become a scientist. It takes courage to enroll for the most difficult courses at the university. It takes courage to climb a ladder. It takes courage to make a painting and show it to people. It takes courage to dance on a stage in front of people. It takes courage to sing in front of an audience. It takes courage to speak in front of an audience. It takes courage to share your kooky ideas about the beginning of time and the universe and particles and God and spirituality. Creativity takes courage.
Right.
So it's easier to say, well, I'm not a creative person, and sort of clam up and shut up and disappear and don't talk and don't paint and don't sculpt and don't sing and don't play the piano and don't apply for a scientific research position because you don't have any ideas about where we could take science, where we could take neuroscience, and what I can bring to the table. So it's so easy to get discouraged, and that's why we need encouragement in our lives, which means, from the French, I believe, encourage, to give somebody the heart to do it. The heart, the desire, the courage, the strength, the heart. I'm going to encourage you by taking my courage and putting it in you, on you, within you, to give you the strength to try something new, to express yourself. Whether you're designing a new kind of clothing or a new shirt or a new pair of sneakers or whatever it may be, it's infinite. The expressiveness that we have in this incredible physical form that we've taken of the human species, with this incredible mind and the supercomputer of a central nervous system and a brain, we can go in any direction, any direction. And it's intimidating to think about. And it can be overwhelming, and it can be paralyzing. There's so many opportunities and so many people doing so many incredible things that you say, who am I? And it's easy to feel very, very small and almost helpless in such a gigantic universe with so much energy and with so many creative people and with so many brilliant minds. It's easy to say, let me dismiss myself from this process. Let me be a spectator in life. Let me put myself on the sidelines and leave it up to everybody else to create the internet and the home computer and the microprocessor and on and on and on and on. And, simple things that seems peanut butter. Well, peanut butter is not such a simple thing. I mean, that was a major advancement by, I believe, who is it, George Washington Carver, who worked on peanut butter, and a lot of work on the soybean, a African American scientist and researcher, decades and decades before his time, a real trailblazer. Every tiny contribution is actually massive. So we have to have faith in ourselves and put ourselves around other people like one another. Deborah Waitley, unfortunately, couldn't be here today, but like the four of us, getting together, sharing ideas, encouraging each other. Everybody says, I don't feel quite prepared for today's program. That's okay. Let's go anyway. Let's begin to begin. Let's see where it takes us. Let's go with the flow. Let's get into the flow of the conversation. Some of the great work that I've studied by the great psychologist from Chicago of Hungarian descent, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who writes on flow. Get into the work first. Start. Have a conversation. Sit in front of the piano. Sit in front of the blank canvas. Put your hands in the paint like a child. Put color on the canvas just to get going, just to get in the flow. Get started. That's the biggest obstacle, is the getting going. If we can overcome that apprehension of what other people are going to think of us, how they're going to judge us, how they're going to judge our work, our product, our creation, if we can get over that and just get going, then everything else will take care of itself 9 times out of 10.
Well, you're a living example of that. You've said a few times nobody ever asked you to paint. You certainly didn't major. You don't have a PhD in art, yet you paint. You paint all of the time, right?
Despite the fact that I'm still not in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I'm
Right.
still not in the Museum of Modern Art,
Right.
I still haven't sold anything in a gallery.
Right.
It doesn't. Why should that
Still doing
stop me?
You're still doing it. That's right.
Why should that stop me? In other words, we live now in a society and in a culture globally that if you can't be the best at something, quote unquote, based on somebody else's standard, based on somebody else's barometer, based on somebody else's yardstick,
Right.
you shouldn't participate.
Right.
Right. So that's absurd. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Everybody, just about everybody, enjoys singing in the shower. So sing.
Right.
Everybody enjoys humming a tune. Everybody enjoys whistling. So whistle. You're making music, right? It's your birthright. It's your God-given right as a human person to express yourself, to draw, to doodle, to knit, to sew, to crochet, to paint with watercolors, to play with clay. It doesn't have to be the next great American novel if you want to write a book.
Right.
I've written several books. None of them are bestsellers. None of them have been on the New York Times bestseller list. I'm not going to stop writing books. I love my books. I love writing books. I enjoy the process. I learn from the process. It's a legacy for me. I leave them to my family, to my children, to my friends, to any of the readers who do purchase them and read them and cherish them. Not every painter can be Picasso. Should everybody else give up painting because they're not Pablo Picasso? So the bar is set way too high, I think, in our minds, because the bar isn't a real bar. Right. The bar is somebody else's opinion. Right. I've often said to you, Paul, and Diane knows, one of my great favorite quotes is from the contemporary artist and painter Donald Sultan, who practices and works in New York City. He's got to be in his 60s or beyond by now. Has had a very good career. But his advice to young painters was, paint as if you live in a cabin in the woods and no one's ever going to see your paintings.
Good advice.
Yeah. Just express yourself. Yeah. Put on the canvas what you want. Yeah. It's not a matter of what Paul wants to see or what Diane wants to see or what my mother thinks or my father thinks or the art critic thinks. You know, one of my other favorite artists, Julian Schnabel, he's had some tough criticism from some critics. Who cares what he thinks? You know, right. It's not. I didn't make it for you. I made it to express myself. Right. So there's all different kinds of music around the world. There's all different kinds of art. There's all different kinds of architecture. There's all different kinds of clothing. There's all different kinds of food, different customs and cultures. One is not better than the other. One is not superior to the other. And if somebody tries to judge it and categorize them and rank them, that's their opinion, which you're entitled to your opinion. Right. But it shouldn't keep me from taking up baking on the weekends if that's what I want to do.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right? It takes courage.
Yeah.
It shouldn't,
right.
But it does. The only reason it does is because society has become so judgmental and critical and opinionated that people have become intimidated. Mm-hmm. And it's absurd. And that's a big part of what our program is about, is reminding people again, that they are spiritual beings. They are made in God's image. They are here as co-creators. Their ideas and contributions are valuable, are precious, are beautiful, and need to be seen and heard and expressed.
Hmm. One a quick follow up question for you, John. I can tell you as a non physician and as a non science person, the belief amongst non physicians and non science people is that physicians and science are exact sciences and they go to medical school and surgery school and cardiovascular school forever and they learn everything. And then when they get into the operating room or they're with a patient, they just go right by the book, just tick it off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, good, done. I'm guessing, and we've never discussed this, so I'm just guessing. There have been times where you've been with a patient, maybe even in the middle of surgery, where you've come up against, well, wait a minute, this is a little bit different than what I've learned before. And then you have to be creative to find a way around or through whatever's come up. Is that a fair guess on my part?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could crank out top-notch surgeons basically with a cookie cutter.
Yeah.
They teach us, and this is not a joke. I mean, this is something that is taught and learned and trained because it is a natural instinct. Um, they teach you as a professional not to say things in the operating room like "uh-oh," or certainly not "oops" or "whoops," right? Um, Especially if you have a patient who's awake, or if you have a team of people working around you. Um, but hopefully, oops, it doesn't come to mind too frequently. But uh-oh comes to mind as a cardiovascular surgeon or vascular surgeon and so on and so forth, and all different kinds of surgeons,
Right.
because complications arise, difficulties arise, problems arise. If there weren't problems, then it would be easy.
Right.
Things that don't have problems are easy,
Right.
you know? So I don't think anybody thinks of surgery, major surgery, or minor surgery for that matter, but certainly major surgery as being easy.
Right.
Or flying an airplane. I often use that example. So in surgical training, besides what you're talking about, which is taught, the basics, the fundamentals, the usual anatomy, the customary presentation of a disease, the typical presentation of a disease, the typical steps in a procedure. Of course, everybody begins with that. Those are the foundations, those are the underpinnings of a profession like surgery. But mastery comes from flexibility of mind, creativity of mind, a mind which can see many alternatives and many paths out of a corner.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take your written examination for board certification, for example, let's use general surgery as an example, which I did. That written examination is more an examination of those basic fundamental elements, that you have an understanding that the gallbladder lives under the edge of the liver and has a cystic duct that connects to common hepatic duct, which forms the common bile duct, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things that get tested on that exam. That's called the qualifying exam. That means you're qualified to sit for the certifying exam.
Okay.
The certifying exam is the oral examination where you get certified by other surgeons as safe and competent to go out into the world and practice and operate on people. In the certifying exam, it's exactly what you described, Paul. It's an examination of creativity, creative thinking, imaginative thinking, and of course, safe thinking. So, what they would do is give a very typical scenario, which you've seen 1,000 times in your training. Let's say someone who comes in with all of the obvious signs of appendicitis,
Okay.
including blood work, including the physical examination, including the patient's history, including the patient's complaints, including the ultrasound examination, including the CAT scan, all of which verify the fact that this patient has appendicitis. Then the examiners say, what would you do? And you say brilliantly, an appendectomy. I would take out the appendix. I'm a surgeon. And they say, brilliant, wonderful, let's do that. Tell us, how do you do that? And you begin to go through the steps. You say, I would make a McBurney incision. Ooh, McBurney incision. That sounds fascinating, doctor. Why don't you tell us what a McBurney incision is and how you would do that? And what layers you go through. Okay, and you describe that. And you're going along swimmingly. You don't have to be creative at all. You know how to take out an appendix until you open the belly and you get to the appendix, and A, they may give you a scenario where the appendix looks perfectly normal. It's not inflamed at all. Or B, even worse, because you could make an argument, well, maybe it doesn't look inflamed, but under the microscope, it'll look inflamed. But how about if they give you the example, which they often do, that you get there and lo and behold, the appendix has already been removed. It's gone. It's not there. Now what? That becomes the big question on difficult exams. Now what? Not A, B, C, or D, not multiple choice. Right. Would you A, B, C? No. Well, doctor, you've done a great McBurney incision. You've exposed the cecum, and you look for the appendix, and the appendix is not there. Now what? Time to get creative.
Just a little bit.
Time to get creative in a meaningful way. Not like, and then I'd pull a banana out of a rabbit's ear. Not that kind of artistic creativity, like creativity that makes sense.
Right.
Well, then I would explore the rest of the abdomen to see, what was causing all of that pain and inflammation and the elevated white blood cell count and the fever through that little McBurney incision on the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. Or would you make a second incision? Ooh, second incision. Okay. In the same operation? Never done that before. Well, maybe. Or extend that incision somehow across the abdomen. So now it's time to get creative. So, of course, creativity is essential for a master surgeon, because you're going to come up against problems where the standard situation and approach will simply not do the job. It won't get you to where you're going. So you have to be creative, ingenious. You have to employ ingenuity based on your knowledge, based on principles of safety, science, do no harm. This is the first tenet of the Socratic, the Hippocratic Oath: do no harm. So yes, creativity is essential to being a great surgeon. If you're not creative, you can never be a great surgeon.
Okay, that's good to hear, because so many people outside of your field view science, they even call it an exact science. Everything has to be done by the book, and you've just dispelled that. If you're not a creative surgeon, you're going to run into some trouble. Might not even get certified, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah. And when we say exact science, it's exact within limits. If I knew exactly how to treat varicose veins 20 years ago, and I was still treating them exactly like that now, I would be outdated by about 15 years and probably considered working outside of the standard of care. Yeah. 20 years ago, it was normal to take a patient to the operating room under general anesthesia and do a stripping procedure, which was, a very aggressive procedure where the vein was basically pulled out of the leg, ripped out of the leg, quite literally. Mm-hmm. Whereas now we use ultrasound guidance, lasers, advanced medications, foam sclerotherapy, microflebectomy under local anesthesia, ambulatory surgery in the office. I mean, a completely different set of skills and tools and approaches. So if it was exact, how could it change? If we knew exactly how to treat it, we knew exactly the right way and exactly the best way, then nothing would change. But things in medicine are changing at light speed, as you know. So there's an exactness to it, in a sense that you don't break rules, you don't put anybody in harm's way. You have to be thinking in a logical defensible, orderly way. But it's not that it's exact that we know all the answers and we understand everything. In fact, I had a professor of neurosurgery who we used to rotate on all of these different specialties, who used to say, kind of tongue in cheek, but in an educational way, I'm not sure we understand everything we know about this.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
You know? So a lot of our beliefs will change as more information is revealed and greater understanding takes place.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I'm glad you said that because not enough people know that. You know it because you're in the field. Diane knows it because she's in the field, but not a lot of people do. You do have to be creative in moments where maybe creativity you didn't think you had to be creative. But
Oh, it's a highly creative field. I mean, if
yeah,
you think about what the bioengineers are doing in terms of creating new equipment, lasers, ultrasound, all sorts of surgical equipment and interventional equipment for the eye, for every organ of the body, for the brain, radiation, chemistry. This is just an incredibly creative field,
right.
incredibly creative. And that's why we're seeing innovation all the time. And medicine getting less and less invasive and more effective, all through the creative human mind.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chubeck. Once again, as always, very well explained, and we appreciate that. And everybody's been listening and watching the Blueprint to Your Success Story, a series we're putting together on video and audio to highlight Dr. John Chubeck's new book, which will be coming out at some point. It's not out yet. Is that correct, Dr. Chubeck? Not available yet, but it will be at some point.
Correct. This is a lead up to the big launch. Hopefully in the next couple of months, I would think.
Okay. All right. Very good. Let's thank everybody for being here today before we sign off for episode 4. Dr. Diane Chuback, CEO of Chuback Medical Group, thank you again for your comments and your wisdom, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, Paul. It's been fun.
All right,
Looking
terrific.
forward.
Excellent. Dr. John A. Chuback, thank you again for putting everything together, for writing the book, and sharing your wisdom as well.
Thanks. The pleasure is mine. And it's always about sharing and paying it forward and hoping that some of this material um, will fall on some ears, that it can make a difference in somebody's life. And if we can touch one life in a positive way, I know it sounds trite, but from my heart, and I speak for Diane and for you, I know, and for Deborah, who's not here today, that makes all the extra effort and all the hard work worth it. Because for me, it's a blessing to have come in contact with this material and to understand it in the way that I do. And I just think it's the most precious and valuable thing in the world.
All right, very well said. You certainly opened up some ears and perhaps eyes today in the world of creativity and just how powerful it truly is. And hopefully people will begin to understand that they can be creative as well or more creative than they already are, right?
That's the thing. I want everyone to embrace it for themselves. You know, in one of Earl Nightingale's programs, I believe on attitude, he says something, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along in that, beautiful deep voice that he had that I'm very envious of. But Bob Proctor used to say if God had a voice, he would sound like Earl Nightingale. Um, Earl Nightingale says, and right here we come to a very interesting point. He says, right here we come to a very interesting point, and that is that somehow we, for the most part, develop to believe that just about anything is possible for someone else, but not for us.
Right.
You know, I could see Diane becoming a PhD in neurochemistry, and I could see Paul becoming a principal of a school and an award-winning band leader, and I could see John becoming a surgeon. But I'm not that kind of person. We kind of you know belittle ourselves, and we shrink our incredible potential. Uh, yeah, of course, Jeff Bezos can do it, and Elon Musk can do it, and Picasso could do it, and Einstein could do it, and on and on and on.
Right.
Uh, but who am I to think that I'm capable of such things? Well, we're here to, you know, tell you and to encourage you that you have every right to be that person and to make your own contribution in your own way. to contribute to society and your community and the world at large. Um, and there's nothing that is um, unimportant, whether it's through athletics or sports or art or business or science or uh, music, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever it is that you have in your heart, uh, let it sing, let it be heard, let it be seen. There's someone out there looking for it that will appreciate it, and it will make a difference. It's not for other people; it's for each of us.
Yep, very well said. And let's end on those words of wisdom because they were so well said. And again, the Blueprint to Your Success Story, Episode 4. Dr. Diane Chubak, thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Paul.
And Dr. John A. Chubak, author of the book. Have a great day. We'll see you next time as well.
Looking forward, Paul.
All right, have a great day.